Hi, I'm the Warrior Witch, and you can call me Nike. The fur is back, not for fashion, but because I am very cold, and this is very warm. Do you guys like the candles in the background here? Let me know, because, I don't know, I think they're kind of cute. We might move again soon, which is unfortunate, but for now I think maybe I'll keep this here for you guys. So today we're going to be talking about not necessarily the specific meanings of everything in astrology, like I'm not going to be going through each planet individually or the houses or anything, but more like how to put it all together, because I find that novice astrologers sort of hit this point where they get all the information together and they're like, what do I do with it all? Like, okay, I have this pile of information, it's very hard to carry it, what do I do with it? And nobody really teaches you like how to set it down and sort of organize it so you can understand what it's supposed to mean. So I wanted to go more through that after a basic broad overview of like what are planets, what are houses, what are signs. Trusty notes as always. So to start off, we probably already know, everybody, even if they're not witchy and they're not into astrology, they sort of know what the signs are, and they're the constellations in the sky. Ancient astrologers chose 12 signs that were in the sky that we chose to be the signs that represent the zodiac, the equal divisions of the sky. Now, each constellation does not have an equal split in the sky. For example, Cancer, I believe, is the one that's a little bit smaller. Some of them are a little bit bigger or in the sky for a little bit longer, but we chose to divide it up due to the seasons. So originally, Gemini was for the end of spring and into summer, followed by Cancer, which was sort of the middle of summer, and Leo, which is sort of the end of summer. And so they corresponded with the specific times of year. And back then the calendar was more aligned with the equinoxes and the solstices, which is why they tend to start around the 21st-ish. So we hit the summer solstice right as Gemini season ends and Cancer season begins. Cancer season begins at the solstice. Just like in the wintertime, that's when Capricorn begins, at the winter solstice. The signs are sort of expressions of energy, sort of archetypes in a way. Many of the things that we go over are going to be archetypal things. We mainly know the signs based on our sun sign, so it's where the sun sits during that time of year. And we've slowly shifted over the course of 2,000 years where when a planet is over that constellation, so if the constellation of Cancer was here and Venus was here, we no longer would say in the Western astrology tradition, the tropical astrology, that Venus is in Cancer. We've actually shifted it a little bit. But in Indian astrology, they keep it with where everything is. So Indian astrology will keep them together. So Venus, when it's physically in front of the sign of Cancer, would be in Cancer, but for tropical astrology, it's going to depend on how much time has passed, and we keep it more to the seasons of the year. And there's a whole math calculations thing that goes into it. Don't stress yourself too much about trying to find that yourself, just know that that's sort of how that happens. I know I didn't really explain this concept very well in the video, so if you want to learn more about this, you should look up the concept called the Procession of the Equinox. This will explain it better than I can, because I don't know all the technical stuff behind it, but if you want to learn more about it, it's the Procession of the Equinox. And we all know the planets, Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, etc. But in the classical tradition, we called them the 7 wandering stars because they appeared as stars in the sky that moved over time when the other ones didn't. So these were the wandering stars. And originally, we only used the planets up to Saturn because that's all the wandering stars that we could see. We could not see Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto. They just weren't within human eye range, so they were not assigned to signs, they did not have any specific placements, and depending on what tradition you follow, you might not even use them for anything, or at least not as a major thing. There's also divisions in what type of astrology you follow. So there's modern sects, there's the Hellenistic sect, there's Indian astrology, and so this is part of why I don't really want to get into what do you use, what sign has what ruler, because this is really going to depend on what tradition you're using. Even, I believe, some of the house significations will change if you're using Hellenistic versus modern versus Indian astrology. So just keep that in mind, that you should do research into what each means and try to figure out which one works best for you, because that's really going to change how your astrology learning goes. And now we reach the houses. So The houses, I'm going to argue, is probably the most important part of astrology for new astrologers especially to learn, and it's why we stress knowing your birth time so much, because without knowing your birth time, we don't know where your ascendant, which is the star that was rising over the horizon, and the descendant, opposite end, the one that was descending over the horizon, we don't know where that line is, so we can't say what sign rules what house for you. Now, this is a big misconception when it comes to traditional astrology. Houses don't have a sign that rules them. Like, the first house is not always ruled by Aries. That's a common mistake. It depends on your rising sign. So for me, my rising is Scorpio, so Scorpio rules the first house. And my first house's ruling planet would be Mars. You know, if Virgo is my 11th house, because my ascendant is Scorpio, it doesn't mean that my 11th house of Virgo is ruled by Aquarius. That's just not how that works. It's my 11th house is Virgo, so it's ruled by Virgo. The ruling planet is Mercury. Now, houses are areas of life where the planets and the signs will express themselves. So first house being like body, personality, second house being like your finances, third house being siblings and short travel. You know, that's the area of your life. So the area of your finances, whatever sign rules that rules over the finances and sort of is how your finances are expressed. Whatever planets are there, those planets are going to affect that expression, and they're going to affect that part of your life. So for example, if I have Jupiter in Sagittarius in my second house, that means that the second house is going to have Jupiter affecting it, and it's expressed in that area. So Jupiter is expressing itself in a Sagittarius way in the area of my life of finances. There's also something called aspects, which is how the planets are set in relation to each other by degree. So two planets that are 90 degrees apart are going to be square. If they are 60 degrees apart, they are sextile. If they're 120 degrees apart, they are trine. So it's how they are relating to each other. This can be beneficial. It can be challenging in terms of like opposition. It's how they now interact with each other. So you have this planet in this sign with this aspect to another planet, and that's how they're interacting. So if I have the sun in Gemini, which is in opposition to my moon in Capricorn, just barely, because it's just barely in the sign, then those two tend to act oppositionally, and it can be challenging. There's also this misconception that people get about good and bad planets, especially if you're studying traditional astrology and you see benefic and malefic and you think, oh, benefic is good, malefic is bad. Malefic planets are always bad and there's never a way for them to be good for you. And you just sort of have to erase that concept from your mind. Good and bad isn't really the basis. It's more of like, how can they help? How do they challenge you? In what ways are they expressing themselves? And there's a lot of like really complicated parts to it. And I'm not really going to get into it. There's a lot of learning resources that I'm going to link below. I even have an astrology learning resource playlist that I'll also link down there. So if you want to learn more of the specifics, I'll put it there. But just as an example, let's take one of the malefic planets. Let's go with Saturn. People will hear, oh, Saturn's a malefic, it's really hard, it must be bad, and wherever it is, that's going to be bad in my life. And that's not exactly true. Saturn can be something that brings you a lot of challenges that can feel bad, but it also depends on what house it's in, what sign it's in, what other planets are with it or in aspect to it. It can depend on how the house that it's in, that rulership is. So if Saturn is in Capricorn, a sign that it rules, then it is at home, it is in domicile, as we will say. Now if Saturn is in Libra, then it is exalted, it's royal, it's lifted up. So it's also well placed, which means that it's not necessarily going to be harmful. Saturn can point to things like an area of life that will appear later. So say it's in your 5th house when it comes to children. Maybe you'll have children later on in life. Or if it's in your house of finance, it could point to being difficult. Again, depending on what sign rules that house, what other planets are on, etc. It could also just mean that you get finances later on in life. You have these things happen later on. It's very slow moving, so it can just be late. It doesn't mean bad. Just the same, you might think, oh, Jupiter, super good, great planet, like big expansion growth, must be a good planet, always a good sign. Not necessarily. If Jupiter is poorly placed, it can mean too much too much of a good thing. It can be excess, it could be like addiction, it could be that you spend too much of your money if it's not really expressed well. So if it's in your second house, but the sign it's in is not a sign that it likes to be in, it could mean that you sort of are too loose with your money, you're a little bit too frugal, you find it hard to hold on to because you just want to spend it all the time. So just because it's a good planet doesn't mean that it is expressed well, it doesn't mean that it's going to be doing good things for you. Jupiter could be your most challenging planet because it's poorly placed. Learning the details of each part first and then sort of how they express themselves is going to be really, really important. So you really should take it slow. People try to say, I want to be able to be a professional astrologer and I'll do it within a year, and that's not really realistic. Most professional astrologers take 4 years or more before they're comfortable doing professional readings. And it's not like you ever stop learning, but it's the point where they finally feel like they've synthesized the information well enough to be able to then do professional readings. It takes like the course of a college degree, like a bachelor's degree. All right, so great, you've learned all the information. Let's say you've learned now what all the planets mean, what all the houses mean. What do you do with it all? You really have to start seeing how do the pieces slot together. So you've started with each individual section. So you started with houses as their own thing, planets as their own thing, signs as their own thing. I would suggest most people get to this stage where they go, okay, planet in a sign. What does it mean when Mercury is in Virgo? What's it mean when Mercury is in Gemini? What's it mean when Mercury is in Sagittarius? So you learn the planet and the sign, but a lot of people don't tend to get beyond that. They stop before they get to applying planet and in a sign and in a house. The house is really important. It's how that energy of planet in sign is expressed. And you really have to be able to synthesize that information, and reading charts of other people is really going to help. I believe it's Astrodienst, but I could be wrong. There are websites out there, I believe Astrodienst, that has a huge catalog of other people's charts. So you could read like celebrity charts. I know that Marin Altman has done Donald Trump's chart, Joe Biden's chart, Kamala Harris's chart. You know, she was doing a lot of political charts, and so you can see her bring those up and go through them. On the Astrology Podcast, for a lot of their examples, they will bring up people's charts and go through them and show you, here's planet in sign in a house and how that's expressed in their life. They'll go through specific examples. Like they bring up Elvis Presley's daughter a lot, and they'll talk about, you know, in this year of her life with this timing technique, this sign had this planet in this house, and this is what happened to express it. This is how that's expressed it in their life. It can be related to parts of their personality. It can be related to events in their life or the way that they do things versus another, how inclined they are to a certain career or to certain actions or to certain people even. You'll see how they synthesize all this information together, and the best way to learn is honestly reading charts. You can't just write a list and be like, what happens if Mercury is in Sagittarius in the 4th house? You also have to then see where all the other planets are placed, how they're placed, how well they're placed, what aspects they're into each other. You really have to sort of synthesize the whole chart together. So you need to start with piece by piece breaking it down and then slowly adding more and more onto it. But at the end of the day, you have to learn to read charts as a whole. So you have to put the whole system together. Like I said, I have a lot of resources down below, lots of links for you guys, a full astro learning playlist. Take it really slow is essentially my advice. Another way that you can really see some of this stuff play out in action is through what's called transits. So you have your natal chart, but then planets will be going around as they always are. Planets are always moving, and you'll see them moving through signs, and you can watch them move through your house. It's easiest to see this with the moon, but not a lot of people necessarily pay attention to the moon. Some people do, it affects some more than others. I would actually recommend looking at Mercury, Venus, and Mars, and that's because these are the 3 planets that move the fastest, in that order, because that's the order they are in relation to the sun, you know, planetary speeds and everything. These planets will move the fastest, and so you can watch them move through your house within a couple of weeks, you can watch them move through the signs, and you can see where are those things in your area of life. So what house are they going through? What sign is that? And what other planets are there? And it's great practice because you can sort of take notes ahead of time and you can look at the transits that are coming up. You can say, okay, on this date, Mercury enters this sign. That is this part of my life. This is my house. And so you can then look back later at what did that mean for you? You can make predictions, and that's part of the learning process. I will sometimes make notes and say, okay, Mercury is going through whatever sign, and that's this house. Here's what I think will happen. And I'll look back at my notes later and say, okay, what did happen during these times? Did it express in this way? How close was I? Did I miss something because of another planetary aspect, like if it was in opposition to Mars, or if it was trine to Jupiter, or to my natal planets? You know, your natal planets can also affect that, so not just the house that it's going through, but the other planets that are trine or aspected or whatever to that. As a realistic example, if something is conjunct to my sun, so if something is moving through Gemini and conjuncts my natal sun, so it's in the same place that my sun sign is, it would then also be in opposition to my natal moon. And so that may also add an effect there. It's not just going to be in relation to my sun sign, which is also with my Mercury and my Venus, but it's also going to be in opposition to what is in opposition to those signs. So you really have to pay attention to where everything sort of is. And so this is that next piece that you synthesize in. And yeah, it's a lot. So just take a breath. It's okay. Really spend a lot of time with this. The Astrology Podcast has individual episodes for each planet, for the signs, for the houses, for transits and techniques. They have some episodes that are specifically about one planet. They have an episode about Saturn signs for millennials. They have an episode for Uranus transits that are coming up because Uranus is so slow and it's going to affect everybody differently depending on their house. You know, they have a lot of really, really great episodes to go through, and they explain a lot of this information really well. And these episodes are like 4 hours long sometimes. I mean, the average ones that I listen to are 2 to 3 hours. So, you know, a lot of this information takes a lot of time just to talk about, just to tell people. They have their houses and their signs episodes split into 2. So it's the first 6 houses or the first 6 signs, and then the second 6 houses or the second 6 signs, and they're each like 4 hours long. So just saying all the information and discussing it in a way that fully gives you the full understanding takes forever. So don't be afraid to take it slow. If this is something you're really passionate about, you're gonna have to dedicate the time to it. So just as a recap, my general advice for how do you learn it, how do you put it all together is this. Learn houses, learn signs, learn planets, learn them individually, not even trying to put anything together. Just learn, what does Venus mean in whatever system you're using? What does the first house mean in whatever system you're using? What do these signs mean? How are they expressed? What dates are they across depending on, you know, the time of year? Most people go for the sun sign for the season. What do these mean individually? And then you mix the planets and the signs. So Mercury in this sign, Mercury in the next sign, how is that energy expressed? Do that with each planet through each sign. I mean, to really take the time with it. So planets in a sign, and then you put it together with houses. And you could even do just the planet in the house. So what does Mercury mean in the second house? Okay, what about Mercury in this sign in this house? So putting all 3 of those basic steps together. And then you start to add in aspects, and then you move on to transits. You'll slowly add more and more of this information together, and you can sort of mix and match. So maybe you do like planets and signs, and then you do aspects. So if you have Mercury in Sagittarius and it has the sun opposite in Gemini, what does that mean to have Mercury and the sun in opposition in these signs? And then you can do the houses. Well, okay, if you have these 2 in opposition in these signs, what about if they're this set of houses or this set of houses? You know, so mix and match, but take it slow. Piece by piece is so important. Don't try to jump ahead and be like, I'm gonna be a professional astrologer tomorrow and I'll binge all night and I'll figure it all out. You won't. There's literally not time in the day to be able to do it in like a week or a month, even a year, I would argue, to truly synthesize the information. So you put it all together, you have, you know, signs, planets, houses, aspects, transits. Start reading charts. Final step is read charts. And do this the entire time. For each piece, you know, when you've jumped from just what does a planet mean, or what does a sign mean, or what does a house mean, into starting to synthesize at least 2 pieces together, start looking at charts then. Look at charts the whole time and break down piece by piece, and that helps you learn. And especially in your own chart, you can sort of do it as a self-analysis thing. So if I have Mercury in Gemini, which I do, what does that mean for me? what does it mean for my moon to be in Capricorn? And you can look at all of that information. And so you'd look in your chart and see, how does that affect me? Well, it's in this house. And so you can slowly piece all the bits together, and you could just focus on one thing. You could focus on just the moon in Capricorn in the 3rd house, aspecting these other things, and you just focus on that one bit. I mean, really taking your time. And this is going to be the best way to learn. You have to really focus on each piece for a long time. And for some people who just want to be able to do it tomorrow and essentially like become an expert in a day, sorry to say it's not going to work for you, and you're going to get really frustrated and really disappointed when you have all these people who have literally been studying for years, who are going to be ahead of you because they've been studying for years. And it may feel like you'll never reach that goal, but I've been studying astrology for 2 or 3 years now, sort of on and off. This year is when I've gotten really, really passionate about it and really dove deep into my research. And just in a few months of being super serious and focused about it, I've learned so much. But it's been hours and hours and hours of dedicated time. I also have a friend who is learning Hellenistic astrology with me. Hey Capt, what's up? And we will DM each other sometimes and be like, oh my god, I just thought about this thing. We recently, when it came to the eclipses, we were like, oh my god, the eclipse is going through this set of houses for this person, this expression of their life, and I think it's going to be this way. Or for me personally, when I was going through my eclipse research, I was like, oh my god, I just realized when I went through that really bad breakup, it was this eclipse in this sign at this day, and this is how it affected me, and I can't believe I never realized that until now. Having someone to discuss it with is really, really awesome. So when I've talked before about communities in other videos, this is part of that great thing, having a community that you can just go and essentially like word vomit at. Many Discord servers. I have a Discord server and you should totally join it, and the link is in the description. You know, a lot of witchcraft Discord servers will have specifically an astrology channel. So you can go in there, you can talk about these things, and you can discuss it with people and be like, I'm learning this thing, what do you guys think? Is anybody else learning astrology like me? And so you'll find your community to discuss it with. You can talk about it on Instagram, you can talk about it on Twitter, I mean like all sorts of social media. Find a community, talk with people, learn with them. You could even form like an astrology book club of sorts where you sort of pick a thing to learn that week, or pick a book on astrology to learn that week or that month or whatever. And you can essentially form communities that way as well, where you're all studying together, you're all learning the same thing together. Take your time. It's really fun, at least I think it's really fun. I really love astrology, but oh my god, it takes so much time. Oh god. So many hours of learning astrology. Sometimes it's just many hours of learning just the houses or just the signs, especially if you're switching systems and you have to relearn it. Oh god. It's so much more time to sort of like set aside the information you've learned and switch to another system. Oh boy. But it's worth it. I honestly think it's worth it. It's changed so much in my life of how I look at things, how I look at myself. I mean, it's really wonderful. Speaking of me, speaking of me, if you want to connect with me more, all of my social media is down in the description. If you want to see any special goodies, I have a Patreon if you want to see videos before everybody else does, and you get to like comment and talk to me before everybody else. Patreon gets early access. I have a Discord server, like I mentioned before. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, etc., all over the place. And if you want to hear me ramble even more about all sorts of different occult topics, I also am part of a podcast called Occultism with a Side of Salt, and we put episodes out every Wednesday. So if you want to hear even more of me, check that out too, because it's pretty cool, and I love my co-host very dearly. Alright guys, that's all I got for you this week, so see you later, and blessed be!